This show has evolved in many ways over the last year and a half, over 50 episodes. And that evolution in some ways has paralleled my sobriety experience. Hey y'all, what's going on? What's going on? Welcome back to the Stacking Days podcast, where we highlight underrepresented journeys of sobriety. I'm your host, Ray Donovan, and today I'm coming at you with episode number 50, which also coincides with the final episode of our current season, season 2. So again, you'll probably notice that I'm here by myself. This will be another solo episode. I wanted to share with the audience, the listener, a little bit about what Stacking Days has meant to me and what contribution it's made to my own journey of sobriety and discovery and growth, and just give you a sense of what the last year and change has looked like in putting out this project that really, for anyone who's listened to the show, recognizes that initially when I planned to do the podcast, my goal was only to put out 5 episodes. And I thought to myself that if I could put 5 episodes out there, I will have made a positive contribution. I will have done something different that was completely alien to me, that I had no experience at doing whatsoever. And here we are now, just embarking on 50 episodes. So, I mean, first and foremost, before I get into, my conversation with you guys about what that's meant to me, I just wanted to first and foremost thank all the guests who have come on to the show to share their journey. And I'll probably thank them, a few more times as we kind of go on here. But first and foremost, Stacking Days has been an exercise in vulnerability for me. For anyone who knows me personally, knows that I am an extremely private person. Leading up to Stacking Days, you never find me on social media. Uh, I was always one to keep things close to the vest, and that wasn't just because I was drinking and had a questionable relationship, and maybe didn't feel comfortable sharing certain things. It's just that naturally I had always categorized myself as an introvert. And even past being an introvert, I was always an extremely private person. So I was very good at compartmentalizing aspects of my life. And what Stacking Days essentially did was it for me, it blew the lid off of it. Not only did it blow the lid off of my relationship with alcohol in a very public way, but it blew the lid off of, and I mentioned this a few episodes back, it blew the lid off of my propensity to remove myself from the spotlight. So this was both, vulnerability, personally, and exposure of my personal life. But, for many people who have questionable relationships with alcohol, they tend to keep things pretty secret and hidden, and from themselves and from others. And this podcast was my version of, ripping off that Band-Aid that I was using to cover up what could have been, a fatal wound. Ultimately, if I continue to have it go unchecked. But I mean, I quite literally like jumped into podcasting, um, almost similar to how I jumped into sobriety. I didn't know a lot about it. I had to learn a set of tools and skills along the way. I had to find aspects of the project that I enjoyed, so much so that it overshadowed my kind of tendency to not want to step into it. So there were a lot of similarities with my sobriety journey, but ultimately, it's given me an opportunity to connect with some of the strongest and some of the most courageous people that I've ever had the privilege of speaking with. There are individuals, while the guests, there have been individuals that even though we've had a lot of shared similar experiences with substances and our place in society, I feel as though that the thing that's unique is that even within that, everyone has their own differentiated experience in how they've pushed through their challenges. And and for me to see how people have slain the dragons in their lives has been nothing but extremely encouraging. So even though I walked into podcasting very much virgin and very much new, it gave me a sense of empowerment just by being able to have conversations up until this point with some pretty special people. So you know, in the same vein of vulnerability and open public honesty, it's clear to me, and I've talked with people, privately and publicly about this, that women play an extremely large role in leading this conversation around sobriety and recovery. And for a show that depends so heavily on guests, and and guests who are willing to come on and dialogue and converse, you know, having women be the overwhelming majority of the guests on the show has been just clear to me in how much they've served as leaders in this space. And I've been really fortunate to sit down with a handful of really amazing individuals in that light. That I continue to be in awe of. I mean, the efforts that they are undertaking, both in their individual lives that they're public about, but also more broadly how they're contributing back into the community, has been fantastic to see it, and also has served as a motivation for me to continue to give back into the community. Um, Another group that I want to give a shout out to and a holler at, that are almost underrepresented in a few different ways, that I've noticed, and for those of you who've watched the show have noticed, have really been able to come through on this platform, is the LGBTQ plus community. A lot of my guests, and I don't know by the number of the percentage, but enough that it has resonated with me, that individuals who societally have been shunned for their preferences, and also for their racial makeup and their culture, have almost overcome multiple hurdles in getting to a place in their life where they're willing to be unapologetic, and they're willing to be very open about who they are, who they've come to know themselves to be, and sharing that with the broader community. And I just truly appreciate folks leveraging that degree of courage, so that in many ways they're no longer living in these shadows of that society has created, that they had been living within. So that has been a resounding experience for me, to just really commiserate with these individuals. And I just wanted to highlight that, because I think that there are so many nuances to the individuals that come onto this show, that we can't lose sight of the fact that past their substance abuse and past their addictions, they are people that are dealing with very real things. And I think that that's what makes this show to me so special, is that I get an opportunity to speak with people that at the end of the day are about as real as you can possibly get. Um, One thing that I wanted to note also, that has been very clear to me, is there's a gap in the dialogue, right? When we think about the demographics of individuals that you often see in public settings, talking about their recovery, talking about their sobriety, talking about mental health. And when I say a gap, I'm really speaking to the fact that there are just not enough men of color in this space. And this is not casting blame on anybody. I mean, as far as this show is concerned, I have so many weeks, and I can certainly do a better job of having more men on the show and seeking out more men as guests. But if you study the space, if you spend a lot of time in the communities, particularly in social communities, and again, the caveat here for me personally is that I don't have a formalized program. So there very well may be AA rooms out there that are chock full of brothers talking and sharing their experience. But on this platform and others of its like it, there has been a clear uh, gap between the number of women of color who are sharing, who have gotten to this place where they're willing to be vulnerable, and then men. Obviously, this is not It's not surprising. I think that we live in a society, specifically as Black men, we are oftentimes, relegated to a very narrow line that we need to walk in terms of how vulnerable can we be, how open can we be, how much quote unquote weakness, can we show. And my hope is that through this platform, we can start bucking that very unhealthy trend that I also have been a victim of. Or maybe not a victim of necessarily, but certainly have subscribed to it. And there's a huge part of my own experience where I was reluctant to be openly vocal about just my, you know, pragmatically my experience. And my hope is that as we continue to develop this platform, Stacking Days, and just more broadly speaking in the culture and the community, that more brothers are willing to come to the proverbial mic and share their experience so they can not only help themselves, but also set themselves up as examples for others to follow. I think that's going to be extremely important, and certainly something that I'm focused on. Being a man of color. That I'm challenging myself on a daily basis to do that. As a husband, as a father, I think it's integral, and for me, it's part of my evolution, my constant evolution as a man, specifically as a man of color. So I'd love to be able to see more of that. More brothers coming on, talking about their mental health struggles, talking about their traumas, talking about the fact that these things are human experiences, and we're not in a position where it doesn't affect us, and it's okay to talk about that openly. And I think that in kind of naming it, that is oftentimes the first step in being able to tame it. So my hope is that more men are a part of this conversation moving forward, and I'm certainly going to seek them out. So for all those who are listening out there, I'm going to be coming for you if you're not proactively coming for me, so that we can have more dialogue together. I know that there's a handful of brothers that I've talked to outside of this platform, and we've all recognized that there is a dearth of brothers who are willing to come around and have this conversation on an ongoing basis. And it doesn't even always necessarily need to be in such a public setting. I think that, even privately, being there to support one another, I think is extremely important. And my hope is that we can transition into a space where we're doing more of that for one another. Um, this show has evolved in many ways over the last year and a half, over 50 episodes, and that evolution in some ways has paralleled my sobriety experience. I mentioned this earlier, but when I started the podcast, I was very much a beginner. I didn't know shit from shit. But I jumped into it. And if you go back to episode one, the first episode with Jessica Duenas, it was a whole hodgepodge of inexperience and Murphy's Law, where whatever could have potentially have gone wrong, it went wrong. I was extremely nervous going into it, didn't necessarily know what to expect. My Wi-Fi went out mid-interview with Jessica, and and in trying to get the Wi-Fi back up, my laptop died. And by the time she and I finally reconnected in that specific conversation, the timing ran out and the data didn't save. So I ended up having to reach back out to Jessica to come on at a later date so we can finish the interview. And there was literally only like 10 minutes left to the interview. But my point is that, uh, you know, I walked into that interview so fresh and so new, but I was willing to take the lumps that come with being a beginner, because there's nothing wrong with being a beginner. And I was willing to continue to learn, and I was willing to every day, when I was getting into this, virtual studio that I've created here for this show, is just try to get a little bit better. not necessarily just for myself, but get a little bit better for my guests' experience and get a little bit better for the listeners' experience. And I think that similarly in sobriety, every day I've tried to get a little better, and things change over time. You become more intentional about certain aspects of the experience and the evolution. And by virtue of that, certain things fall to the wayside, but I never lose sight on the fact that you can always, get a little bit better with a tweak here and a tweak there. That is a lesson that I feel and I see, not just on the podcast and other aspects of my life, but has certainly shone through in this podcast. And I appreciate having this as a creative outlet to remind me of some of the things that I find are just really integral to ongoing development in life. So wanted to kind of just put that out there. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. If you are, we'd really love it if you could leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcast or a rating on Spotify. And of course, please feel free to invite somebody into the conversation. If you feel like you have a story to share on the podcast, why not apply to be a guest? You can do so by completing the form on the podcast description or find it on stackingdays.com. That's stacknday's.com. But for now, let's jump back into the conversation. I mentioned this on a previous episode. Life can be extremely messy, right? But at the same time, it's up to you to be able to find the beauty in the messiness. And that is something that I've certainly come to know very, very, very intimately doing this show, is that there's a lot of mess. There are platforms that I'm recording on that I'm unfamiliar with. I have, software and hardware that don't always necessarily perform the way that I want them to. But I've kind of pursued this mantra, in a way where I'm less concerned about perfection and I'm more concerned with just making sure that I'm putting it out there. And I'll get better with time, so long as I'm consistent over time in showing up. And I feel like that's very similar to how I've looked at sobriety. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she was talking about how, how did the name of the podcast come about, Stacking Days? I mean, I thought it was obvious, but it's not. So for those who are unsure about where the name comes from, Stacking Days quite literally means stacking one day on top of the other. And one day on the top of the other, in my mind, means consistency. It means discipline. It means showing up, and it means creating a breadth of experience over time that is one moment on top of the other. That is what sobriety and recovery has looked like for me. That is what development has looked like for me in my early 40s, even past sobriety and recovery, as a father, as a husband, as a professional. So, stacking days, in a lot of ways keeps me honest. It keeps me coming back to sit in this seat, to interview folks, to start talking more freely and open form in a solo manner. So I encourage anyone who's out there, whether, you're on a sobriety journey, a development journey, or even if you're starting to think about doing your own podcast, get into it and give yourself an opportunity to keep getting into it day after day after day, and put together a body of work, of input that you can be proud of over the course of time, that other people can be proud of over the course of time. But it does definitely take that consistency, and it takes that accountability for oneself to continue to show up. And again, that's another experience that I've learned in doing this podcast. We launched this podcast in February of 2022. 23, sorry, 2023. So a lot can happen in one's life over the course of the year. And for me, I this this year personally has been extremely challenging. I've experienced loss, and of folks that I care about in my family have come and gone. I've lost my job over the course of this past year, and have experienced extreme financial pressure that I haven't felt in a long time. Which, for anyone who's come from a place in their life where they, when they were younger, where they didn't have anything, the last thing that you want to feel is the pressures that come with not having. And so that's weighed extremely heavy on me over the last year. By way of my sobriety, I've had to have some real honest conversations in my marriage, in my partnership with my wife. I've had to come to terms with who I am as a father, all these roles, as a sibling, as a son. Therapy has helped a lot in this dialogue that I've been having. But my point is that, like anyone out there who's listening, life is always constantly throwing you challenge, right? Constantly throwing you challenge. Constantly the floor is shifting below your feet, and you got to keep showing up. This podcast has given me an opportunity to keep showing up. It's given me a space to put energy, put efforts when everything else at any given time seemed like it wasn't actually working in to my benefit or working in my favor. And I think it's important to note that when you're passing through life, that even when things seem out of your control, so far gone, that you can't rectify. They're similar to messiness and beauty. There are still aspects of your life that you can take ownership of, that you can take control of, and that you can walk forward one day at a time. And those other pieces will start to then also come into focus. I think it's a matter of momentum and making sure that you're putting your energy out there. And this show has been quite literally a representation of putting an energy out there. And now, mind you, I haven't done this alone. I've done this in partnership with many guests, and I've also done this in partnership with many folks within my own personal community that have supported the show. Right, I've done this with the support of loved ones. My wife has supported this show since before day one. It probably wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for her contribution and for her support of me. Both emotionally, and also, as I mentioned, she's said, hey, look, we're also going to financially make this thing happen because it's making a positive impact for you, i.e. me, and the broader community. So, and then past that, my family. I mean, my sister, I talked to her about it, this stuff quite a bit, and she's been extremely supportive. And friends, former colleagues from like a whole nother world that have nothing to do with sobriety and recovery, send me notes when I run into them. They big up the fact that that I'm doing this, that this platform exists, and just are in awe of the community of folks that are pouring into it. And these are folks all colors. This Black folks, white folks, you name it. They're supportive because I think at the end of the day they recognize that everybody can use some healing, and I think this is a platform for that. So the podcast has certainly reinforced a whole bunch, for me. And I think that otherwise, if had this Stacking Days not existed, there would have been a huge part of my own recovery journey that probably would not have existed. So in a lot of ways, I attribute the success that I have had and continue to stack days and continue to do the work in that I have Stacking Days as a platform to come to really lean on the strength and courage of others, and and try to circumvent and avert my own existential crises that that life undoubtedly will find a way to throw at you every once in a while. So with that, we're going to take a little bit of a break here. We're going to take a step back, a few paces, and reinvest in our mind share, our creativity, our talent, our thoughtfulness into making Stacking Days even more meaningful, even more impactful. I want to be able to continue to capture our journeys in a way that's authentic to our voices, and it to be a space where we can all come when we need a little bit of encouragement, and we need to lean on those examples shared by some of our guests, for our own strength. We're going to take a step back at this point. We're going to close out season 2. We're going to give this thing a little bit of rest. We've been working this muscle quite hard. And when I say we, I quite literally mean we. I'm not the only person who works on this project. Maria Hogan, who has helped me a ton from an editing standpoint, from a management standpoint. She's poured her professional experience into the show. Amari Pollard, who's also been a collaborator on this project from a social side. So these are folks who have been brought into this Stacking Days realm that don't have anything necessarily to do with recovery, but recognize that it is a conversation that needs to be had. So I want to give them their shout outs and and just acknowledge them for the contribution that they've made to Stacking Days so that it can continue to exist. And I'm looking forward to continuing to make things happen moving forward. I tell every guest who comes on to Stacking Days that this platform is just as much theirs as it belongs, to me. So I want to extend that exact same invitation to the listener as well. So if there are, if there are voices, if there are faces, if there are conversations that you believe need to be had that we're not having, please reach out. I mean, I've said this before. I believe that feedback is an absolute gift. And, for those who listen to this show on a weekly basis, and I know that you're out there, I would love to hear from you. And in addition to wanting to hear from you so that you can contribute into the conversation, even if you're not a guest on the show, go in, subscribe if you haven't already, leave a review on whatever platform you happen to listen to the show on, because ultimately what I'm trying to do is challenge you to ensure that other folks who are out there who look like us and sound like us don't have such a hard time finding our stories. And the more that we pour into this platform, the more we're going to be able to get out of it, the more impact it's going to be able to make for the folks who need it. I certainly needed it at a certain point in time. I still need it to this day. And I think that, we all have an opportunity to kind of contribute to that and amplify the conversation so that it's just easier to find. I think that, not only is it easier to find, but I think it's important for folks to recognize that we are having the conversation as well. So I wanted to put that out there so that you guys can really think about that and take this gap in the season to pour back in. I mean, we got 50 episodes for folks to go back into on the library and listen up on. And again, as I head into season 3, I want to really, source creativity from the community and see how you would like to have this podcast differentiated in a way that is, that plays to your sensibility, that plays to your ear, that is speaking to the issues that you're having if they're not coming out naturally through our own dialogue. So in short, I'm excited, to get ready to start working on an impactful season 3. But until then, a few different things. I want to make sure that you recognize, this year is going to be an extremely challenging one. This is going to be an election year here in the U.S. It's going to be extremely divisive. And I think a lot of folks are going to be looking for ways to cope. And I think a lot of folks are going to be looking for resources to prop themselves up and give them the strength to continue to move forward because there's just going to be a lot of crazy shit I feel like going on around us. So, do me a favor, take care of yourselves, take care of the others who are around you. And I'm going to close this thing out the same way that I always do. And I hope that you really hear me. I want you guys to be well. And I want you to be well one day at a time. Don't bite off more than you need to chew. Just focus on one day at a time. And before you know it, things will be looking up. Okay? All right, y'all. Appreciate it. Thanks for giving me the space to chat solo. We'll be back in a little bit with season 3. And until then, we'll talk. All right. Peace. I appreciate you guys listening to the Stacking Days podcast. I hope this episode added value to your recovery and wellness journey. Before we go our separate ways, let's connect on social. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Stacking Days or via the website www.stackingdays.com. By supporting the show, you can play a direct role in amplifying people of color in their pursuit of recovery. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe or hit the follow button. This way, you'll never miss an episode, all while playing an active part in creating the ecosystem where diverse voices in healing matter. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. For more information on the resources and support available, take a look at SAMHSA and some other resources shared in the description. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.